Chapter 31. Disappearance of a Butcher. That night, under cover of darkness, a party of horsemen dressed all in black rode out from Shoeville, headed by Major Roach. Hidden beneath a large bit of sacking on a wagon in their midst was the gigantic wooden foot, with its carved scales and long, sharp claws. At last they reached the outskirts of Barronstown. Now the riders, members of the Ickabog Defence Brigade whom Spittleworth had chosen for the job, slipped from their horses and covered the animals' hooves with sacking to muffle the noise and shape of their prints. Then they lifted the giant foot off the wagon, remounted, and carried it between them to the house where Tubby Tenderloin the butcher lived with his wife, which was luckily a little distance from its neighbours. Several of the soldiers now tied up their horses, stole up to Tubby's back door and forced entry, while the rest pressed the giant foot into the mud around his back gate. 5 minutes after the soldiers arrived, they carried Tubby and his wife, who had no children, out of their house, bound and gagged, and threw them onto the wagon. I may as well tell you now that Tubby and his wife were about to disappear forever, in exactly the way Private Prod had been supposed to dispose of Daisy. Spittleworth only kept alive those people for whom he had a use. Mr. Dovetail might need to repair the Ickabog foot if it got damaged, and Captain Goodfellow and his friends might need to be dragged out again some day to repeat their lies about the Ickabog. Spittleworth couldn't imagine ever needing a treasonous sausage-maker, though, and so he ordered for his murder. As for poor Mrs. Tenderloin, Spittleworth barely considered her at all, but she was a very kind person. Once the Tenderloins had been taken away, the remaining soldiers entered the house and smashed up the furniture as though a giant creature had wrecked it, while the rest of the men broke down the back fence and pressed the giant foot into the soft soil around Tubby's chicken coop, so that it appeared the prowling monster had also attacked the birds. One of the soldiers even stripped off his socks and boots and made bare footprints in the soft earth, as though Tubby had rushed out to protect his chickens. Finally, the same man destroyed one of the hens and spread the feathers around before breaking down the side of the coop to allow the rest of the chickens to escape. After pressing the giant foot many more times onto the mud outside Tubby's house, so the monster appeared to have run away onto solid ground, the soldiers heaved Mr. Dovetail's creation back onto the wagon beside the soon-to-be-killed butcher and his wife, remounted their horses, and disappeared into the night. Chapter 32. A Flaw in the Plan. When Mr. and Mrs. Tenderloin's neighbours woke up the next day and found chickens all over the road, they hurried to tell Tubby his birds had escaped. Imagine the neighbours' horror when they found the enormous footprints, the feathers, the broken-down back door, and no sign of either husband or wife. Before an hour had passed, a huge crowd had congregated around Tubby's empty house, all examining the monstrous footprints, the smashed-in door, and the wrecked furniture. Panic set in, and within a few hours news of the Ickabog's raid on a Barronstown butcher's house was spreading north, south, east, and west. Town criers rang their bells in the city squares, and within a couple of days only the marshlanders would be ignorant of the fact that the Ickabog had slunk south overnight and carried off 2 people. Spittleworth's Barronstown spy, who'd been mingling with the crowds all day to observe their reactions, sent word to his master that the plan had worked miraculously. However, in the early evening, just as the spy was thinking of heading off to the tavern for a celebratory sausage roll and a pint, he noticed a group of men whispering together as they examined one of the Ickabog's footprints. "Terrifying, isn't it?" the spy asked them. "The size of its feet, the length of its claws." One of Tubby's neighbours straightened up, frowning. "It's hopping," he said. "Excuse me," said the spy. "It's hopping," repeated the neighbour. "Look, it's the same left foot over and over again. Either the Ickabog's hopping or—" Well, the man didn't finish his sentence, but the look on his face alarmed the spy. Instead of heading for the tavern, he mounted his horse again and galloped off towards the palace.